I'll tell you exactly how this started and why every lawyer in the county now knows my name. People think land disputes begin with shouting, threats, maybe a fence argument. Mine started with 12 printed words inside a blank envelope someone slipped onto my gate at sunrise. Serenity Ridge Phase 4 cannot proceed unless the Carter parcel is vacated. Then, two more, bold enough to make my jaw clench. Step aside. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to HOA Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? If they had knocked on my door like decent human beings, maybe we would have had a conversation. But where I come from, slipping onto a man's property in the dark is how trouble introduces itself. I grew up on this land, 60 acres of cedar, dust, old fence posts, and the kind of memories you can't put a price tag on. My mom used to say the soil remembers every boot that ever touched it. That morning, my soil remembered an intruder. I held that note for a long time, feeling the insult settle into my bones. Whoever wrote it didn't think they needed to sign their name. They thought telling me to step aside was enough, as if my home were a folding chair they could move whenever their paperwork demanded it. Well, they picked the wrong chair. I walked the fence line slow, checking for tracks, tire marks, anything. Nothing. Whoever trespassed knew how to move quietly. There are only two types of people who leave no footprints: hunters and thieves. I didn't know which one I was dealing with yet, but I had a feeling I'd find out soon. The next morning, the answer arrived wearing khakis and holding a clipboard. I heard them before I saw them. 3 men on the far edge of my property, measuring, scanning, placing bright orange flags into the ground like they owned it. Their boots were clean, their shirts pressed, and not a single one of them looked like he'd ever mended a fence or fixed a busted pipe in his life. I walked toward the fence and called out, "Morning." Not one of them bothered to look up. That alone told me everything I needed to know. These weren't locals, and they weren't visitors. These were paid men on someone else's mission. Finally, the tallest one answered without turning. "Boundary verification for Serenity Ridge development." Standard procedure. Standard procedure, my ass. "You standing on the Carter property," I told him. "We're within public right-of-way," he replied. Bored. Dismissive. Like he'd rehearsed it. One of the others bent down and pushed a survey flag an inch past my side of the gravel. I stared at the thin orange marker as if it were a knife stuck into my floorboard. "You boys sure you know where your boundary is?" I asked. The tallest one finally met my eyes, just for a second, long enough to see I wasn't playing neighborly. His face tightened. They packed up fast and left in a shiny white SUV with temporary plates. Before the door shut, I heard one of them mutter, "If he doesn't move, Phase 4 dies." Good, let it. But the trouble didn't end at my fence. Trouble rarely does. The very next day, a new vehicle rolled up my driveway. Black truck, polished chrome, a man stepping out like he'd practiced his confident walk in the mirror before coming over. "Mr. Carter?" he asked, extending a hand I didn't take. "I'm Brian Hayes with Horizon Vista Developments. We're coordinating with the Serenity Ridge HOA. I didn't invite him onto my porch, but he climbed up anyway." "Your land is ideal for Phase 4's Greenbelt Transition Zone," he said, with the kind of smile people use when they think they're smarter than you. He opened a folder and slid glossy renderings in front of me: cul-de-sacs, walking paths, a decorative pond. All drawn right on top of my pastures like my fences didn't exist. "Let's talk numbers," he said. "We're offering well above market value." "My land isn't for sale," I told him. He nodded like he was expecting resistance. "The HOA has already approved boundary adjustments. Everything's ready, just need your signature." I froze. "Boundary adjustments?" He handed me a contract tabbed with color-coded stickers like a teacher's lesson plan. "Pending acquisition of the Carter parcel," he read aloud. "What acquisition?" I asked. He hesitated, first crack in his salesman armor. "The HOA told us negotiations were underway." That was the moment everything clicked. Not only had they decided my land belonged to them, They'd already promised it to someone else. I pushed the contract back. You bought something someone else didn't have the right to sell. Brian swallowed, turning pale. Mr. Carter, you're making this difficult. No, I said. I'm making it accurate. He left with his fake confidence crushed into the floorboards of my porch. That should have been the end of it. But people with money don't like hearing no, especially when they've already spent it. The next afternoon, the HOA came themselves. 4 cars, 4 board members. The president, Linda Prescott, tall, stiff, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Carter, she said, standing at my locked gate, you are obstructing the development of this community. I'm not part of your community, I answered. You are adjacent, she snapped. Which makes your compliance mandatory. One of her men stepped forward wearing an outfit that could charitably be described as wannabe security. Your gate is a safety hazard, he announced. This gate's been here longer than your subdivision, I told him. If it wasn't a hazard last century, it ain't one today. Linda raised a perfectly manicured hand. We can petition the county for condemnation if you continue resisting. Finally, there it was, the real threat. You planning to sabotage something and call it a hazard? I asked. She didn't deny it. Didn't have to. Her silence was an admission louder than any word she could have said. They left angry. And when people like that get angry, they don't fight fair. The next morning, the postal worker delivered a stack of HOA violations thick enough to be a phone book. I opened them on my porch, slicing through envelopes like a butcher. Fence height incorrect, livestock containment inadequate, structures unsafe, failure to maintain visual harmony. Visual harmony. They wanted my land so bad they invented violations for a ranch that existed before their HOA president was even born. On the last page of the last envelope was the real punch. They filed a zoning review on my property, claiming environmental concerns requiring temporary access. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were preparing to walk onto my land with the county behind them. I stood there with those letters spread across my kitchen table and felt something shift inside me, cold, clear, steady. If they were going to fight with paperwork, I'd fight with proof. That night I set trail cameras, UV tracer powder, motion lights, and thermal sensors across every weak point of the fence. I wasn't just protecting my land. I was waiting for someone to make their next mistake. They made it at 12:43 a.m. The camera feed chimed once, twice. 2 figures crawling under the fence. Gloves, hoodies, backpacks, moving like men who thought they were invisible. They weren't. The UV powder lit their footprints like blue flames. The motion lights froze them like startled deer. One planted a metal stake into my soil. Serenity Ridge Phase 4. Boundary stamped right on the steel. They weren't trespassing. They were rewriting my land on purpose. And that was the moment I stopped being the man they wanted to push aside. That was the moment I started fighting back. The night I caught those 2 slipping under my fence changed everything. Before that moment, the HOA and their developers were just a nuisance. Annoying. Dishonest. Entitled. But standing in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, watching those glowing footprints trail through my pasture like ghostly blue fire, something clicked inside me with the clarity of a snapped bone. They weren't pressuring me. They weren't negotiating. They weren't confused about boundaries. They were executing a plan, a deliberate, coordinated, illegal takeover of land they didn't own but had already promised to someone else. And they were doing it in the dark, because men who do things in the light expect to be questioned. Men who work in darkness expect to be obeyed. I saved every photo, then every video onto 3 drives. 1 went into my safe. 1 went into a metal box in my old truck, and 1 went into a manila envelope I kept on the kitchen counter. I sat there with a cup of black coffee as the sky began to lighten, thinking through every angle of this mess. They'd planted stakes. They'd falsified boundaries. They'd issued a blizzard of violations designed to bury me under legal pressure until I buckled. They'd sent surveyors, developers, HOA board members, all with the same smug confidence of people who believed the ending had already been written, and maybe on their paperwork it had. But paperwork is only as powerful as the lies it hides, and now I had evidence sharp enough to cut through every one of them. The next morning, I went out and pulled those metal stakes from my land one by one. Every time the steel shrieked against the soil, it felt like I was ripping out a root someone had tried to sneak into my foundation. 9 stakes in total. The 10th had the laminated Phase 4 development map clipped to it. The one that showed cul-de-sacs where my cattle grazed, walking paths where my barn stood, a decorative pond where my father had buried our old dog when I was 12. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a confession. Someone at Serenity Ridge had already filed this with the county. Someone with authority. Someone who thought the land was theirs long before they showed up at my gate with fake smiles and forced politeness. I brought the map inside, laid it across the table, and traced the lines with my finger. They had sold the Carter parcel, promised it, planned it, advertised it, built digital models of it, and they'd done it before they ever bothered to ask me if I was interested in selling. They didn't want to buy my land. They wanted me gone so their lie wouldn't collapse. And that right there told me 2 things. 1, they were cornered. 2, if I pushed back publicly, they'd try something worse. So instead of pushing publicly, I pushed quietly. I spent the next day writing a letter addressed to the one group of people Serenity Ridge couldn't afford to upset, the investors funding Phase 4. Horizon Vista land. Development had money, reputation, and an allergic reaction to legal disaster. Their name was all over the glossy brochures Brian Hayes had slid onto my porch table. Their contracts were referenced in half the HOA paperwork I'd been sent. And from the look on Brian's face when I refused to sign, I knew one thing for certain: he hadn't told them the truth. Investors hate surprises almost as much as they hate lawsuits. So I prepared a surprise of my own. I printed the UV photos of the trespassers, the screenshot of the drone hovering above my barn, the video of the glowing footprints, the map pulled from my soil, and the step-aside note that started the whole mess. I wrote a short letter, no drama, no threats, just the truth, laid out cold as steel. You were sold land. Serenity Ridge does not own. They trespassed to fabricate new boundaries. They falsified filings, and if you continue Phase 4, you will be liable. I sealed the envelope and drove into town. I didn't hand it to Brian. I didn't hand it to the HOA. I walked into Horizon Vista's satellite office, placed the envelope directly onto the receptionist's desk, and said, "Legal Department. Direct delivery. Someone's been lying to you." Then I walked out before she could ask a single question. Some fuses don't need to be watched. You just light them and walk away. On my drive home, a strange calm settled over me. Not peace. Real peace is soft, gentle, earned. This was different. This was the quiet of a man who finally has the right weapon in his hands. Serenity Ridge had numbers, money, bureaucracy. But I had something they didn't expect: evidence and the nerve to use it. When I pulled back into my driveway, the land felt different, not safer, just honest, like it was waiting to see what the next move would be. I didn't have to wait long. By evening, I found footprints by the fence again. Not fresh, but recent. The same heavy-soled prints from the night before, circling the property line like someone was checking to see if I'd found the stakes. They'd come back. They'd looked. They'd seen the metal was gone. And they'd left in a hurry. That told me the fuse I lit was starting to burn. Desperate people always come back for what they think they're losing. So I prepped again, not out of fear, but anticipation. I pulled out old COCOC foggers from storage, the kind I once used during controlled burns. I placed them where anyone sneaking in would naturally walk. I wired low-frequency speakers high in the cedar line, ready to send out a vibration you feel in your ribs before you even hear it. I printed official-looking signs: hazard zone, restricted access, bioorganic decomposition area, nothing illegal, just intimidating enough to make a coward rethink his life choices. I didn't need to hurt anyone. I just needed to make every inch of trespassing feel like regret. Around 1 in the morning, the fog started rolling. Thin, white sheets sliding across the grass like the earth was breathing. Then the speakers hummed low, nearly inaudible, more sensation than sound. And like I expected, 2 shadows appeared at the fence. The same 2 from the night before. Nervous, hesitant, stopping short when the fog touched their boots. They whispered. They argued. And, when the low-frequency hum deepened, they ran. Not casually, not tactically. Full on, sprinted back toward Serenity Ridge like the land behind them wanted them dead. That was when I realized something important. Fear was working faster than paperwork ever could. When the sun rose the next morning, I brewed another pot of coffee and sat at the table with the map, the photos, and the stack of HOA violations. I knew what was coming next. Horizon Vista was going to call. The HOA was going to panic, and soon someone was going to try to fix a lie too big to hide. By noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Austin area code. I let it ring. People who lie deserve silence. The next day, a sheriff's deputy drove up to my gate, hat in hand, polite. Not accusing, just curious. He'd received questions about late-night activity near Serenity Ridge. I didn't show him the evidence yet. I just nodded and said I'd be glad to cooperate. When he left, he gave the HOA entrance a long, suspicious stare. That same afternoon, Horizon Vista called again, then again. 6 times in 1 hour. I didn't answer. Let them sweat. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting for them to knock on the right door, the courthouse. I didn't have to push them. Panic did the work for me. When people who spend millions realize they've been lied to by an HOA with more ambition than sense, they don't file complaints. They file legal action. 2 days later, I received an official notice, court date scheduled. Serenity Ridge, HOA versus Daniel Carter. They thought they were dragging me into a fight. What they didn't realize was I'd already been sharpening every blade. And I was nowhere near finished. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before sunrise, not because I was nervous, but because land teaches you a certain kind of discipline. You rise early, you prepare, and you face whatever's coming head on. For the first time in weeks, the ranch felt quiet. Not the nervous quiet from before, but that deep, steady quiet that comes after you've already made your decision. Today wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a reckoning. I drove to the courthouse with the same manila envelope I'd built piece by piece, the photos of the glowing footprints, the footage of the trespassers, the Phase 4 map they'd planted in my pasture, the drone shot, the original step-aside note. Every lie they told me was tucked neatly inside. Every truth they tried to hide was ready to be pulled into the light. The courthouse smelled like old wood and dust, the kind of place where 1,000 arguments had been settled long before I ever walked in. The hallway was buzzing with people, but everything went quiet when I saw her. Linda Prescott, HOA president, pacing with a look on her face like she'd swallowed something sharp. Her lawyer, a man named Charles Huxley, was sweating through his suit jacket. That alone told me they were already losing. When our case was called, Carter versus Persis. Serenity Ridge, HOA. I stepped into the courtroom and felt every eye land on me. I didn't have a lawyer. Didn't need one. Truth doesn't stutter. The judge, a thin, older man with sharp glasses and a sharper stare, looked up at me. Mr. Stan. Carter, you're representing yourself? Yes, sir. Huxley smirked like he was about to watch me walk into a buzzsaw. That smirk didn't last long. He stood first, flipping open his binder. Your Honor, Mr. Carter has repeatedly obstructed lawful HOA activity. He has denied access to land. That? The judge raised a hand. Land that belongs to the HOA? Huxley stuttered. Well, the boundaries are under dispute. Dispute, the judge repeated slowly, like he was tasting the word. And who created the dispute? Huxley cleared his throat, already losing ground. Your Honor, we have documentation showing. I stepped forward. Not as much as I do. The judge nodded. Mr. Modded. Carter, you may present your evidence. I handed the clerk the USB drive and watched the screens flicker to life. The first video played, 2 hooded figures slipping under my fence in the middle of the night. You could hear the gallery murmur behind us, whispers rising like steam. Then the footage of the metal stake being planted. Then the flash of the motion lights freezing them like criminals. And then the part no one in that room expected. The UV powder exploding into glowing blue, outlining every footprint, every handprint, every knee that touched my soil. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff leaned forward. The judge turned slowly toward the HOA table. Mr. Huxley, would you like to explain why your client's agents were trespassing on this man's property at 1:30 in the morning? Huxley was sweating so hard his collar darkened. Well, Your Honor, we can't confirm the individuals in the footage were acting under the HOA's authority. I lifted the black UV flashlight from my pocket. Maybe this will help. The judge motioned for the lights to be dimmed. I walked toward Linda Prescott. Her eyes widened. She tried to scoot her chair back, but there was nowhere to go. I switched on the UV beam and swept it across her slacks. A faint glow lit up the fabric near her ankle. Just enough tracer powder to betray exactly where she'd been and what line she'd crossed. The gallery erupted in whispers. She looked down at her pants like they'd started burning. Huxley grabbed her arm, whispering frantically. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Prescott, were you present on Mr. Carter's land during these unauthorized boundary placements? She swallowed but didn't answer. That was answer enough. Then came the knock on the courtroom door. 3 sharp raps. The bailiff opened it, and in walked a man in a charcoal suit with a silver portfolio, Horizon Vista's legal representative, not the little field office. No, this was corporate. He walked straight to the judge and introduced himself. Your Honor, Horizon Vista requests permission to address the court. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. The man set his portfolio down. We have reviewed evidence delivered anonymously last week related to the Serenity Ridge Phase 4 project. Horizon Vista had no knowledge that the HOA sold land they do not own. Gavel once. Serenity Ridge HOA is hereby prohibited from entering or exerting jurisdiction over the Carter parcel. All boundary claims, development filings, and compliance citations are void, and given the evidence of trespass and fraudulent conduct, further action will be referred to the county prosecutor. Silence. Heavy, final. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded once. When you tell the truth loud enough, someone eventually hears it. As the room emptied, the Horizon Vista representative approached me. You did the right thing, he said quietly. No, I replied. I did the necessary thing. He shook my hand and walked out. Huxley was packing paperwork in a panic. Linda stared at the table like it had betrayed her. And for the first time since this started, I felt the weight that had been sitting on my chest finally slide off and hit the floor. The week after the hearing changed the landscape, literally. County workers removed the Phase 4 signs from Serenity Ridge's entrance. A sheriff's deputy visited to confirm the investigation into the HOA board was already moving. 2 board members resigned immediately. Linda vanished from public view. And Horizon Vista pulled every dollar and every promise they'd poured into that neighborhood. A lie that big doesn't collapse quietly. It explodes. I spent the next few days walking my fence line, not looking for trouble, just appreciating the land that had always been mine. Every cedar post my father set stood exactly where it belonged. Every stretch of grass bent in the morning breeze the way it always had. My land didn't forget who owned it. And now neither did anyone else. One evening near sunset, I saddled my horse and rode the ridge. The sky turned orange, then red, then that deep purple you only get in open country. I stopped right where they'd planted the first stake, and for a moment I just breathed. Easy, slow, free. I thought about everything they'd tried to take. Not just the land, but the history, the roots, the sense of belonging that grows only when generations pour themselves into the same soil. People like them think land is something you buy. People like me know land is something you belong to. When I rode back toward the house and saw the porch light glowing warm, I realized something important. They didn't just lose a development plan. They lost the war because they never understood what they were fighting for. This wasn't about profit. It was about home. And no HOA, no developer, no clipboard-waving stranger was ever going to strip that from me. If you want more stories like this, real battles, real stakes, real consequences, make sure you follow, subscribe, and stick around. Because out here, lines aren't just drawn on maps. They're defended. Every inch, every time.